Welcome back to the Valery Real Estate Masterclass. As it stands right now, we've learned whether or not it's best to buy or rent a home and how to look at making that decision for yourself. We've learned about personal finances and qualifying for a mortgage, and then we've learned about engaging a real estate professional in your real estate transaction process and whether or not it's something you can do on your own. And now we're going to move to one half of the real estate transaction, which is the home buying process. Generally, the home buying process can be divided into sort of three categories. The first one is qualitative factors, which I would call the heart of the decision-making process. The second one would be quantitative factors, which I would call the head of the decision-making process. And then the last piece would be the actual process, the nuts and bolts, the mechanics of going through buying a house. And that process can be broadly defined as you're going to start looking at properties and you're going to get qualified for a mortgage. Once you start looking at properties, you can either do it yourself by browsing online and going to open houses and trying to take a do-it-yourself approach, or you can engage the help of a real estate professional. You're going to look at a lot of houses and analyze them as thoroughly as you can through walkthrough. Once you find a home that you like, based on some of the criteria that we're going to outline in this lesson, you're going to make an offer on that property. And after a series of negotiations, you'll arrive at something called an accepted offer. Once an offer is accepted, it's either firm, which means that there's no conditions to complete the sale, or the offer would be accepted conditional. A conditional offer means that there's a couple of boxes that you need to check prior to fully committing to purchase the house. After removing conditions, an offer would become firm, and at that point, you're fully committed to purchasing the house. And if you decided to not do it or committed some sort of fraud between then and closing, you would lose your deposit. The deposit is a good faith gesture. It's an amount of money that you give to the seller's real estate brokerage, and it's held in trust. To be held in trust means that a legal contract is the only way that money can be taken from one account to the other, which means that those funds would be safe and they would only be used for the transaction of this property. A deposit is one of the ways that you can make an offer more compelling. Typically, if you can imagine yourself as a seller, if you see a bigger deposit, it's going to mean that the buyer is more well capitalized and they're putting more skin in the game to purchase your property. There is no set standard for what deposit is required within the industry, although you will often see properties on the MLS that require a deposit of about 5%. So let's first start with the heart of the transaction. This is what I would broadly describe as qualitative decisions, or decisions that are based on your subjective opinion, what you want, your wants and needs as a home buyer. These aren't decisions that I or any other realtor can make for you. These are things like design choices, accessibility, location. There's a very thorough list of haves and wants that people need to think about when they're going into the home buying process. And one of the best exercises that I think a home buyer can do is to actually take these things and write them down on paper. What are things that you need and what are things that you want? If you have two people purchasing together, I would actually recommend that you separate those lists and each party writes down these individual wants and needs, and then you compare the lists thereafter and see where you have similarities and where you might need to make compromises. Because housing affordability in the province of Ontario is really one of the biggest headwinds for most people in their home buying decision, the art of compromise is one of the most important factors in a home buying decision. A lot of these qualitative factors can begin creeping into the quantitative end of buying a house, which is what I call the head of purchasing real estate. Quantitative factors are things like, how much would it cost you on a monthly basis to service a mortgage on this home? Is that going to deteriorate the lifestyle that you want to be able to live after taking possession of the home and the financial picture that you want to have for your family? How much is it going to cost you to maintain this house? How much is it going to cost you to make any necessary repairs on the home? Are there any major deferred maintenance items on this house that need to be addressed within the next 10 to 20 years or within the tenure or ownership period that you plan to have this property? Some of the most major maintenance items that you want to scan for during the process of a viewing of a home, not an inspection of the home, we're going to get to that later, are things like, how old is the furnace? How old is the roof? And how old are the windows on the property? These are probably the three most expensive deferred maintenance items that you might need to address in the foreseeable future as a homeowner. Once you've reviewed all of these factors and collaborated on your wants and needs lists, you can actually start aggregating those things into the process of searching for a home. In Canada, there are a couple of different eras of construction. So there's the pre-war era, and then before that, there would be your Victorian era. After the war, First and Second World War, we saw a bit of a construction boom, and this is where you hear about wartime bungalows happening during the war. And then there was a post-war period of returning workforce and a lot of new homes being built with bigger families because of the baby boom. After that, towards the end of the century, we started seeing some big changes and improvements in the building code. And this is kind of where you moved a little bit more into the type of home that we see built today. Those trends would have started in the early 1990s. Generally speaking, the older a home is, the more work it's going to need. And it's relatively likely that there is deferred maintenance that's taken place over the course of its life. So while a lot of these homes can be relatively depreciated, and that often is reflected in the price, which means that you can get them maybe at a little bit of a discount on a per square foot basis, they may also come with the drawback of the fact that you might have to inject capital into the home or make renovations to make the home more suitable to your tastes. And if I'm being honest here, given the state of Canada's housing market for most of the past decade, housing affordability is really the primary headwind that people face during the search process. And so buyers don't often have the luxury of looking for their dream home in most markets in Ontario. Once you've sort of arrived at the check boxes that you need filled, I would encourage you to use Valery to go and set up a search and track properties in certain areas, have them emailed to you on a regular basis, and start a automated search that's tailored to your preferences. Making sure that you're getting these things sent to you on a regular basis is a really good way to make sure that you don't miss a good opportunity in the market. Sometimes a property can come up for sale and it's such a good deal that it's sold within 24 hours. You want to be the person who sees that. When you think about the outstanding maintenance that needs to be done on a property, it also leads you down the path of examining what renovations you might do for your own personal preferences. Remodeling can often boost the value of a property as well as generate a return on investment for you. And so for a lot of home buyers who maybe necessarily can't afford everything that they want today, being able to factor in a renovation in the future is a great way to have your cake and eat it too. A little insider tip in the real estate profession, the following renovations usually generate the highest level of return on investment. The first one, and this is purely based on an AVM or automated valuation and appraisal method, is the addition of a bathroom. The next would be a complete kitchen remodel. And then the third would be starting to pick off some of those major deferred maintenance items that I mentioned earlier, such as redoing a roof if it needs to be done, redoing a furnace, or redoing the windows in a property if those need to be done. Any glaring maintenance items that you take care of is one less obstruction for a future purchaser of your home. The last major factor that I'd recommend that you consider as a home buyer is the location of your property. You'll often hear in the real estate industry, the number one factor in real estate is location, location, location. Real estate professionals love to use this term. If you're a young home buyer, especially if you're busy with your career, there are a lot of important considerations to keep in mind. These considerations will help you make an informed decision when choosing between the best different types of housing styles. Some housing styles are lower maintenance and some housing styles are higher maintenance. We covered this earlier in the course, but just as a quick refresher, if you buy a condominium unit, most of your maintenance is done for you, but you do have to pay a monthly fee for the privilege of having that done. If you buy a townhome, you get somewhere between a condo and a fully detached house where you don't have a ton of maintenance, but you do have to do most of the maintenance yourself unless you live in a condo townhouse. If you buy a detached property, this is probably the most maintenance intensive type of property that you own. It is usually most well suited for people who can afford to have a third party do the maintenance, or they have the time to do the maintenance themselves and are really going to get utility from having a larger lot that their house is on. Beyond the lot size of your property, I want you to think a little bit about where that neighborhood that you're living within is located in proximity to certain things. Real estate decisions are made using the principles of urban economics, which is basically the intersection of your distance to market and the budgetary considerations that you have. So what this means for you as a regular home buyer rather than a commercial real estate consumer or a company is how close are you to your job? Is the commute time going to kill you? Do you want to spend that much time in soul-sucking traffic, or is there close enough proximity to public transit that you can maybe buy back some of that time on a train doing more leisurely activities during your commute? Are you close to all of the necessary services that you need? Daycare, grocery stores, retail and commercial services. Do you value proximity to your friends and family? Do you need proximity to healthcare or doctors or any other service providers that are necessary for your family? All of these things need to be factored in the decision-making process. One of the things that I would recommend doing is actually mapping the drive time between the home that you're looking at purchasing and the 5 most frequent locations that you visit. Really get an understanding and wrap your head around what it's going to be like for you to move into that location and then have to go to and from all of those places on a regular basis. This is especially true if you're making a massive change between markets. If you're moving from one city to maybe a city that's further away from the core in the interest of buying a more affordable home. Understand that trade-off, that affordability, is a compromise that you're making. And on the other side of it, it means that you might have to spend a lot more time in the car. So now we're at the point where you have a firm offer on a property and the seller's real estate brokerage is holding a deposit in trust to later be used towards the down payment of that home. The only case in which this is a little bit different is if you're buying a pre-construction property, there's something called a cooling off period, in which there's a period of time given for you to change your mind and rescind that commitment to the contract if you choose to do so. Outside of Ontario, cooling off periods have been introduced in some real estate markets, most notably in British Columbia, on resale properties, and its impact on removing negative externalities or affordability issues in the real estate industry in that province is still yet to be determined. So it's unlikely we'll see any major change like that take place in Ontario anytime soon. The cooling off period was introduced to deal with a market in the state of mania, which is sort of a period in which there's a lot of exuberance and people are really rushing into purchase decisions based on something called FOMO, or the fear of missing out. And on that note, it's relatively important that you, as somebody who's looking to purchase real estate, stay in touch with what's happening in the market, what the market conditions look like. And the best way to really think about this is market temperature. Market temperature refers to whether or not the market is in a buyer's market, a balanced market, or a seller's market. The best way to think about this is which party in the transaction is in control of the pricing power of real estate. So in a buyer's market, there are far more homes for sale than there are people looking to purchase those homes. This puts the market in something called the state of excess supply. A market in a state of excess supply would be a market where there's a lot of listings available. There's a lot of homes for sale. And so you as a buyer would be able to go through the process and look at 10 or 20 homes before deciding on one single house. In more supply scarce markets, or markets where excess demand was present, and this was very much the case during the pandemic period from about 2020 to 2023 in Canadian real estate, there were very few homes for sale. What happens when there's very few homes for sale, even if there isn't a lot of people there to buy them, means that you have very limited options and you're forced to pay more than you might want to for the limited number of homes that is available. On the Valery website, you'll find a chart that measures market temperature using the sales to new listings ratio. This basically measures how quickly the market is absorbing new listings as they come available. If that ratio, it's a percentage, is below 40%, then the market would be in what we call a buyer's market. This means that less than 40% of the new listings are being purchased by buyers. If that ratio is between 40 and 60%, the market would be in balanced market territory. This means that somewhere around 50% of new listings are being purchased by buyers on a monthly basis. If that ratio is above 60%, this means that there are a lot of buyers. More than 60% of the new properties are being purchased by buyers in the market. For the most part, all other things remaining equal, if you're in a buyer's market, this means that buyers are the ones dictating the price, which means that there's more room for prices to move down. If you're in a seller's market, this means that sellers are the one dictating the price, which means there's more room for prices to move up. Now that we've looked at a market that favors either buyers or sellers, and we've gone through the buying process, let's take a look at what the process of selling a home looks like. And even if you're a home buyer, I would encourage you to take a look at this next section, because it'll give you perspective on what the other party in the real estate transaction is thinking, and you can put yourself in their shoes. And that's one of the most powerful things you can do when you're trying to purchase a home. So I'll see you there.